أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب ولكن البر من آمن بالله ويوم الآخر وملائكته وكتابه ونبي وآتى المال على حبه ذوي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل والسائلين وفي الرقاب وأقام الصلاة وآتى الزكاة والموفون بأهدهم إذا آحدوا والصابرين في البأساء والضراء والحين البعث أولئك الذين صدقوا وأولئك هم المتقون. Sadaqallahu Azim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "It is not righteousness that you turn your faces towards east or west, but it is righteousness to believe in Allah and the last day and the angels and the book and the messengers, to spend of your substance out of love for Him, for your kin, for orphans, for the needy, for the wayfarer, for those who ask, and for the ransom of slaves, to be steadfast in prayer and to give zakat, to fulfill the contracts which you have made, and to be firm and patient in pain or suffering and adversity, and throughout all periods of panic. Such are the people of truth, the God-fearing." Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to another episode of Islam for Europeans. Please like and subscribe to the channel. And I want to get back to making reaction videos, that are around like, the Muslim sphere and specifically YouTube. But I want to, take a more kind of a positive stance, because I just listened to the interview between Brother Dilly Hussain, as you know, from Five Pillars and Blood Brothers, and Brother Paul Williams, who runs Blogging Theology, right? So shout out to both of those two brothers. I do think that they did a wonderful job with this interview. You can like and subscribe to their channels as well. I know that in the past I had been very critical of Dilly, um, especially when it came to like kind of some of the incendiary tweets that he tweeted out from years past. But my opinion of Dilly has vastly improved. And please, if Dilly, if you're watching this, please forgive me if I offended you in any way. Um, and I think part of the reason why that is because that Dilly has really just recently started to interview many different figures, specifically on the dissident right. I think he's interviewed 3 of them so far. So for those who've been following my channel, we talk about a lot about these schisms that exist on the right wing, but with several caveats. One is that we don't actually advocate allying with what we call the dissident right, or in this case, in this interview, they call them the populist right, the Nick Griffins of the world. But I do think that it is important to note that these schisms do exist. Usually when it comes to Islamic leadership or spokespeople, especially in the social media realm, up until recently, the general thought was that the only people that exist on the right are those who are basically the anti-Islam right. The Douglas Murrays of the world, the Tommy Robinsons, who just basically hate Islam, they hate Muslims, they hate the fact that Islam is illiberal, everything that ranges from the ideas about jihad to the young age of Aisha, to female genital mutilation, without any discussion or any nuance or any goodwill when it comes to establishing discourse with Muslims. So for the longest time, many Islamic leaders, even those who thought that they had a good grasp on what the European right believes, didn't really understand that this schism had already existed for several years, going all the way back to 2017. But better late than never. Now, some people have criticized the fact that Dilly is interviewing these people, like asking, why should we even give them a platform? And that is a good question. I can probably make another video for that. But my quick take on that is that if you do um, valuable survey research on the non-Muslim populations that you're living in, with making sure that you're not making sure that you're getting a representative sample, of the population, then you can really kind of start to get a grasp on what people believe about not just Islam but Muslims, immigration, and the correlation, between these different opinions. So in general, I thought that that Dilly is starting to really understand that this nuance exists, right? And I must commend both Dilly and Paul really for having a wide breadth of Islamic knowledge, which I think is absolutely necessary. And you know, I'm a layman. I don't consider myself an ignoramus when it comes to Islam, but like both these brothers are very incredibly knowledgeable, and I do think there's a lot of good information that you can gain from their channels. Especially when it comes to Paul's channel. But I wanted to offer like basically a critique of this video, not to criticize either of them personally, but just to look at where we're headed in terms of the language that I guess Muslim leadership has been using. When it comes to the fact that Western audiences are listening to us and listening to what we have to say, and we are starting to establish discourse with various people in the Western world, and I think this is very important, because it's 2024, as we can see with with the recent polling, that even though you may see that among the extremes on the anti-Islam side, there may be an increase of maybe anti-Islam incidences. But on the whole, the support for both Islam and Muslims, various political causes, has never been higher in the Anglosphere. And I think that this is an important point, not just in Europe proper, but all across the Western satellite countries. So, getting into the interview, and I made a whole bunch of notes on the interview itself, and I'll provide the link, to that if you wanted to listen to it. So, early in the interview, Dilly, obviously makes this distinction that one camp you have the Christian Zionist, right, and on the other side you have the Nick Griffin kind of white tribalists who are anti-Zionist, right? So, and I think to a degree in the interview he understands that unfortunately any type of political party that exists in the West has to be on the side of the anti-Islam right in this regard, in order to have any type of political future or any political voice. No politician could be elected, being on, say, the populist right, unless they take this pro-Zionist, anti-Islam stance, or at the very least be quiet about it. So and I think that's one point where I might disagree with, in Paul's response. Like he mentioned, Geert Wilders and Le Pen. This is not the populist right. They are establishment parties. They're pro-capitalism. They don't represent the will of most of the European public. Most of them just vote for them because the other alternative is left-wing liberalism, pro mass pro mass immigration, and they vote for these parties. I'm sure many of them are on the anti-Islam right, but the thing is, the people on the populist right, they almost feel like they're cornered. They have no choice but to vote for the Le Pens of the world and the Geert Wilders of the world, with promises that they're worried about the demographic situation of those countries, right? But they don't like each other. Like if you watch some of their videos, they have nothing but the people on the populist right really have nothing but disdain for the governments that are supposedly on the right, but really are just as bad as the establishment left or left of center parties. And then to vote for like a fringe party, it's not going to get you anywhere really. The way that Western elections are set up is always first past the post. So any third party is not going to have much effect at all. In fact, the argument is if you vote for like a fringe party, like a patriotic alternative, or even an AFD, you're taking away votes for the right of center party. So it's basically a waste of a vote. So I think that Dilly understands this, and I think it really begs the question that uh, you know like when it comes to Western voices, those voices are not getting heard. A, because no politician would take a stance that's pro-Muslim, and B, any of these figures that take a more like traditionalist stance or anti-capitalist stance or opposed to foreign wars in the Muslim world, it's more likely that these Western voices are going to be completely deplatformed. So you're not going to see these voices come to you and talk to you. Paul mentioned Speaker's Corner. The fact that someone's coming to him at Speaker's Corner, a woman, and arguing about the young age of Aisha. So you know, um, if you're an Islamic spokesperson, and I'm not picking on Paul. I mean, this is pretty much par for the course for many people in the mainstream Islamic discourse. You know, let's take a look. What their daily life is like. They might spend their days either at a mosque or just at work. They may spend their days on social media. So, what kind of non-Muslims do they interact with on social media? Well, if you're a Muslim influencer with any clout whatsoever, you know, the people who are the most anti-Islam on the right are going to troll you constantly. And whenever you make a tweet, especially when it's incendiary, they're going to respond with a lot of hate, and they're going to get a whole bunch of likes from their followers, right? And the same goes for Speaker's Corner as well. I mean, you're going to attract them like flies. I mean, Speaker's Corner is, we don't have an equivalent here in Canada, but I know that in England, the people who hate Islam the most, they're going to troll like your common Muslim interlocutors. And on top of that, like your Islamic channels, they're going to make reaction videos to that. So it becomes like this kind of compounding effect. This Islamic spokesperson that I know well, he made a video and he had an interaction, and it was like this intellectual slugfest with someone on Speaker's Corner. Let's make a reaction video to that. And then it gets hundreds and hundreds and thousands of likes from other Muslims. So, the discourse is almost rigged. Like your average everyday Westerner, whether you're on the populist right, like the Nick Griffin crowd, or maybe you're far more moderate. You're maybe neutral. Maybe you have like maybe you respect Islam, but like you just want to go throughout your day. These people are not going to take the time to go to Speaker's Corner. They're not going to take the time, to even maybe approach a Dawa booth. They may not take the time to, establish discourse with Muslims on TV. So you're not going to get, what I'm saying is that you're not going to get a representative sample of what Westerners think about Islam, Muslims, immigration. If your entire day is going to be A, at work, B, at the mosque, C, Speaker's Corner, and D, social media, you're going to get a very black and white picture of what Westerners think about Islam. Right. So, um, so I do like, but again, I'm not trying to nitpick Dilly or Paul. Like I said, they do incredible work, and I think they're doing a very good job. And with interviews like these, you're always going to say things that you don't have time to really articulate. Um, but I'm going to get to my main point, in a little bit. But I do want to talk about the fact that that they did mention immigration in the UK. And I think that's they said it's a legitimate concern. I think my take on that is that I think many Westerners are aware of the fact that the reason why you have many of these problems, with the refugee crisis, is that Western governments have decimated Muslim lands, especially in the last 20 years, starting with the neocon invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. So definitely that's a major factor why. But one of the things that Paul said, and many other Muslim speakers say, is that Blair, in fact, Tony Blair said that there is no connection between invading Iraq, Afghanistan, and immigration of Muslims to the West. So, if you're talking about the initial neocons invasions of the 2000s, sure, at that time in 2003, especially among like the English Defense League, you had some people who were saying, let's bomb them back, before they bomb us. Really incendiary comments, right? But in general, like even in 2003, at the time, the Western world held the largest protest in the history of the world against the invasion of Iraq, right? So there was vocal opposition, to this invasion. What the UK and US government did in unilaterally invading Iraq was not, a decision made by all Westerners, is what I'm saying. So I guess the whole point of my video is, the take home point is, should we be using the term the West to basically quantify all of the evil things that, Western governments and Western media, and, airport security have meted out on Muslims and the Muslim world? Is that a fair assessment? And is it just bad optics, basically? And uh, my response to that is yes. That's basically my thesis, and I don't think we should be using this term "the West," to quantify that, because when your average everyday Westerner, your average everyday white Westerner, when they think of the term "the West," what do they mean? What comes into their mind? What comes into their mind, if you're in the United States, is baseball, football, chicken wings, hot dogs, carnivals, right? Like freedom of expression, freedom of speech, equality under the law. That's what your average Westerner thinks of when people say the West, right? So for Muslim spokespeople to use this term, uh, is just, especially now in 2024. Like I said, support for Islam and our, against these horrible foreign policies among Westerners, support for us has never been higher. So it's really taking us several steps back when we're using this term "the West" to define everything evil that that Western governments have meted out on Muslim populations. I mean, all you have to do is watch, like YouTube channels that are against, what our governments are doing. For example, you can watch Judge Napolitano, Andrew Napolitano, who's from the U.S., who interviews several, retired U.S. generals. He's interviewed Douglas McGregor. He interviews Max Blumenthal. Um, you know, they never use the term "the West," when they're talking about, these evil forces. They may use the terms "the elites in our government." They might use the terms "the powers that be." They may just specifically refer to, the government or democratic regime. You know, um, so they never use this kind of terminology. Even when you have, channels like Katie Halper, she has several guests on, who are Jewish anti-Zionists. Even they, refrain mostly from, using this kind of overarching term, right? You know, um, and where am I going? So that's one thing. So why shouldn't we use this? So there's basically two populations, um, that are going to get, like a false impression when you're using the term "the West." One, as I mentioned before, are non-Muslim Westerners, and I know that, podcasts like Blood Brothers and even my own podcast and the Madman Luke's, they're not catered toward non-Muslim audiences. They're catered toward Muslim audiences. So one could say, well, we can use these terms. We know we know what we're talking about. We know that, we're not referring to all Westerners when we use the term "the West," and people, non-Muslims, should be able to make that distinction. Which I think is kind of a cop out, because at the end of the day, we're also trying to reach a non-Muslim audience. And I know that, for us who know that these Islamic figures, we know that they don't they don't have the same ideology as, the post-leftist Marxist variety. And then Dilly, pointed that out himself. So that's great. But to your average non-Muslim white Westerner, you have to understand there's been a large push in the university system, within the jobs, the career system, like big tech companies, to push this kind of really hard anti-white agenda. That everything evil that our governments have all done can be sort of deduced down to quote unquote whiteness. So when they hear these terms, it's kind of it's being said by Islamic spokespeople. There's like this immediate visceral reaction, and they start to think, well, this is what they believe. That because they said this, then this is what they believe, right? So um, one could say, again, this is not our goal. This is not what we mean. It's our podcasts are not catered toward a non-Muslim audience. Muslims who watch our videos, they understand that we make this distinction. That we're not, when we say the West, we're not talking about your average everyday Westerner. So that's a fair point, and that's all well and good. And I understand where you're coming from, even if you don't agree with me on non-Muslim Westerners. But the other group, that hears this kind of rhetoric, um, are the Muslim youth, right? And we as adults, we understand and we have the capacity that when Muslim spokespeople say the West, to refer to evil that's been meted out on Muslims and Muslim peoples. Um, we can make that distinction. But Muslim youth, they don't have this kind of capacity. Their brains are still developing, and they're going through an identity crisis. They're high school, grade school. They could be very cruel environments. Like kids, they can be cruel. And they can say bad things, Islamophobic things, racist things, towards Westerners. I mean, to Muslims living in the West, second gen, third gen. And they're gonna have allies as well, white non-Muslims who are on their side. But to use the terms of the West and Islam basically as antonyms. It's basically like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and um, you're basically saying that Islam doesn't belong in the West, that they're complete antipodes, that Islam has nothing to offer the West. And I know that's not what they mean. And I know that they gave several examples in this video that, Islam has really great things to offer Western populations. To use this term as like an antonym, the cons greatly outweigh the pros. Like I understand that there's a lot of anger towards Western governments, but when you have all these Muslim youth in the alpha generation, that may be going this kind of identity crisis, that's just going to push them away further. It's going to further make them think, if I do this thing, or if I hang out with this non-Muslim population, or if I hang out with white Westerners, does that mean that this is against Islam, right? So I just the cons greatly outweigh the pros. Like I said, there's many other terms that we can use in lieu of the West in these videos. Western governments, the governmental elites, the powers that be. Even referring to, you don't even have to use these kind of use this kind of dichotomy. You could just focus on the parties that are making these decisions. But I digress. That's just my nasiha. I mean, people, Muslim leadership, they can take it with a grain of salt. They can say no, we'll just keep using the terms the West and Islam. But I can understand maybe in 2003 when Islamophobia was at its zenith. But I mean, when you see all the polling, when you see all non-Muslim Westerners in the streets, when you see all these people converting to Islam, just stop yourself and think, is this now the time? Do I really want to keep talking like this? Because, the Anglosphere, their opinions on Islam, Muslims in the West, we don't have hard data on what they actually think. And if we're going to take our opinions of what they think via social media, the average troll on Speaker's Corner, your Douglas Murrays of the world, the David Woods of the world, who are paid trolls to try to, rile Muslims up. We're not being honest with ourselves. I think we need fair quantitative research on what they think about Muslims, Islam, immigration, all these things. And then if they still feel that way, then by all means, use the term the West to refer, the West referred as the antithesis of Islam. But You know, like it's just there's no cons in switching the terms up. Anyway, I know that's kind of a rant, but in any case, you know, again, I don't want to sound like I'm coming down on Dilly and Paul. I know that, you know, they're definitely making an attempt to, you know, greater understand, you know, Westerners, white Westerners' thoughts on Islam in the West. Um, so, you know, that's one good thing. Um, in any case, you know, let's talk about, you know, some of the great things, the good things in this video that they had. I mean, the arguments that Paul made about you know, how to respond to like the young age of Aisha, you know, like he pointed to the fact that you know, this was a cultural norm, you know, back in the day. This is something that everybody practiced. Um, you know, like that's a really good point. The fact that no anti-Islam figure, you know, from the Prophet's time, peace be upon him, all the way up until, you know, the 19th century, you know, they had all these arguments against Islam, but they never brought up the young age of Aisha. Why? Because, you know, this was a cultural norm that was just basically worldwide. Um, you know, so I think those are really good points. You know, like Jonathan Brown, Muhammad Hijab, they've already talked about these things in length. So, you know, may Allah reward them, you know, for, you know, like combating these kind of anti-Islam arguments. I just don't think, again, that, you know, to say that it was quote unquote the West, you know, that changed the norms and made it so, you know, like we changed our idea of what, you know, adulthood is. You know, created this kind of term, you know, of teenagehood. You know, I think that's more just part and parcel of, you know, the Industrial Revolution. I mean, you know, like you know, like encountering the Industrial Revolution, you know, there was education was more highly required. It had to be more standardized. You know, you needed engineers, you needed thinkers. You know, you had, you know, you just got done, you know, a couple of world wars. You know, like and yeah, I mean, feminism introduced, you know, the kind of women in the workforce, and that pushed, you know, the age of adulthood upwards. So I get it. I get it. On the surface, it seems like quote unquote the West is responsible for, you know, increasing the age at which people get married. Um, but this would have happened regardless. I mean, had the Industrial Revolution occurred in, say, China, you know, to an extent, Japan, you know, was, you know, most of this technology, you know, a lot of the technology came out of Japan, you know, in the 50s and 60s, and you know, you had a corresponding increase in, you know, like the amount of years that, you know, children had to stay in school. So should it be critiqued? Yes, absolutely. You know, and I think, you know, people are getting married, you know, later in life, and you know, that's pushed, you know, European fertility rate down quite a bit. Um, you know, so I think the only point that I would add to that is that, you know, when it comes to like the young age of Aisha, is that, you know, and we should look more into this, you know, anthropologists and whatnot, that, you know, back then it was very tribal. And if you didn't have a high birth rate, because, you know, fertility death rates were very high, life expectancy was very low, you needed as a tribe as much manpower as humanly possible to be able to survive, you know, the next generation. So, you know, and you know, a couple of things here. I made so many notes on the video. Yeah, I mean, all the arguments that you know, Paul made about, you know, the jizya and everything like that. That's all super stuff. I mean, like, and I think that he gets it that, you know, Islam has a lot to offer the West. You know, which kind of brings me to, you know, to my last conclusion. And I know that you know, like, you know, on our channel, you know, what we've advocated for is a very simple solution to how, you know, Islam can, you know, serve as a bulwark in the West. And that is that, you know, what we stated before is taking a communitarian approach, you know, to the dawah. Um, what I mean by that is that, you know, you have Muslims coming from different countries of the world to non-Muslim countries. You know, so for example, the UK, United States, Canada, and you know, those populations not only are Muslim, but they're bringing in a particular culture, you know, the cuisine, the dress, you know, the architecture and whatnot. Um, and that's fine. I mean, like, you know, like the Muslim community, we're one ummah, but at the same time, we're not one community. You know, people have their own cultural aesthetics, they have their own slang, they have their own language, and you know, they form these kind of tightly knit, you know, subgroups, you know, throughout the West. So, what we've been advocating for at Islam for Europeans is that, the converts to Islam should do likewise. You know, like they should be building parallel institutions, that help with their daily needs, and they should be collectivizing on a group level. And if you do that, what happens is that, not only do you have people converting to Islam, but you facilitate the process of those people forming a wolf pack, where it's a lot easier to marry each other, have kids, and then by that you see this synthesis of Islam, within their own cultural aesthetic, as long as it's within the bounds of Islam. Now Dilly mentioned that 8% of the Muslims in Britain identify as white. So that's great. But what does that mean to a Nick Griffin? What does that mean to a Jim Dowson? Um, when they're so worried about the demographics of their country. Well, if you have an ever-growing white Muslim population living side by side other Muslim populations that come from other countries, then Islam will be seen as actually increasing the total fertility rate of the country. So if those 8% of white British Muslims, if the majority of them are intramarrying, having kids, getting married earlier, then you're going to see the white Muslim population in the UK increase, right? So theoretically, if the white Muslim population is 50% of the total Muslim population, then it wouldn't be a factor in decreasing the total fertility rate of the white British. And then you can say that it would completely deflate the argument of the populist right, or the anti-Islam right, that's saying that Muslims are here to replace your culture. In the United States, 20% of Muslims in the United States identify as white. And I think a major factor for that is that, and again, there's an option for Arab as well. There's less Islamophobia in the United States than there is in the UK. So, when you are a white person, you convert to Islam, your family may be opposed to it, but, they still may accept the fact that you're Muslim. They still may let you live there. It still allows you to be a visible Muslim in that country. So that facilitates the process, right? But if you're in a country that has a lot of Islamophobia, let's say you're a white person to convert to Islam, not only does your family hate Islam, but the white British girl down the street, maybe she converted to Islam, but her family also hates Islam. So getting married to this girl, now you're going to have two families that hate Islam. So what I'm trying to say is that this is a sticking point, a paradox that we should be putting forth as much as humanly possible, because this will completely divide the anti-Islam right and the populist right, which is what we want. I mean, we can't ally with either side. But if we take this position, you're basically dividing the two, right? So the Geert Wilders and the Douglas Murrays, what they're doing is they're actually decreasing the total fertility rate of the white British by taking all these anti-Islam stances, because this kind of sub-community of white British people is far, far, far more difficult when you keep just harping specifically on Islam. So, I know that may have been a bit difficult to understand, but as a final point, and Dilly brought this up with Paul, the fact that they were talking about being stopped at the border, the airport. Paul presented his passport, asked 3 questions, and boom, you're done. And you notice that Muslims, who are people of color, they get stopped more often, they get asked questions more often. And this is an example of quote unquote privilege. I loved Dilly's response to that. Dilly said that he doesn't look at privilege in a post-leftist type way. These are bounties that Allah has given us. He has given us privileges. The fact that you're a white convert to Islam, you have more of an in with your overall community. You have a better standing with your friends, your family, the people you play tennis with. That a Muslim from, say, Bangladesh, or second-gen Muslim from Pakistan is never going to have. So that's a good. So that is a privilege, right? I can walk through the mall. People don't know that I'm Muslim. That's a privilege, right? I was talking to a Jamaican brother, who is also a convert. And he said when he's in Jamaica, people don't realize that he's Muslim because he blends in with the Jamaican society. So you could say that's a privilege. But I like how Dilly, position it and say, this is actually a good thing. These are advantages. These are bounties that Allah has given us. And, you can, as a Muslim, you can totally live within those bounties, without trying to place the blame on any particular person. So I like to take the Dilly had. I do think that, and again, nothing against Paul, but again, he doesn't look at least like a visible Muslim. There's nothing, let's say, indicating that he's a Muslim within his name. I've been stopped at the border, going into the United States, as a white convert, because I had another white sister in the car who was wearing the hijab, so we were visibly Muslim. So, but I don't want to nitpick. I do understand that this exists, right? But, for those who are on the the post-leftist crowd, my question to you is this: if that's the case, then what's the antidote? And again, what we're proposing, if you have a sub-community of visible white British Muslims, then they're actually visible within the society, and Islam just becomes like a universe, just seen as a universal religion for all cultures. And so that's my take on that. I know I've talked at length. I am willing to talk to either or both Paul Williams, brother Paul, blogging of theology, or Dilly at 5 Pillars. I know I said some incendiary stuff, incendiary tweets in the past. Please forgive me for anything I would have said. I do have my critiques, like I said, which I've stated beforehand. But at the same time, overall, I think it was a good interview. And I do think that there's some utility in Dilly interviewing people on the populist right. Again, I don't think we should ally with them, but it's good to know that the Muslim population, the people who watch, like these kind of Muslim influencers, understand that these schisms exist on the right. And again, there are, you have people on the center, you have people on the center left, the center right, who don't have these extreme opinions, like a Nick Griffin or a Douglas Murray. So I think what we need is, like I said, good quantitative and qualitative research on what non-Muslims, white non-Muslims think about, Islam, Muslims, immigration, the whole gamut. So that's my time for the day. Please like and subscribe to Islam for Europeans. And that's all I have to say. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.